week's theme is frightening records, 3 or more frightening records. And for me, frightening is a really personal sort of reaction you have to records. For me, it's a combination of grief, remorse, something monstrous, that hollow feeling. But in general, the tunes, the records that I picked had shambolic rhythms. There's some music concrete, where it's just pure sound and weird vocalizations. So here's my 3. Here it is, right here. The Exorcist soundtrack. Okay, so this is the scariest movie ever made, and that seems to would seem to eclipse the music itself, but the music by itself is very frightening. By the use of modern classical music, the 12-tone scale, but atonal music in general. So originally there was a soundtrack commissioned for this record, but Friedkin threw it out. Essentially what this is Friedkin made his own playlist and it included Penderecki, a big part, but he also hired Jack Nietzsche to augment the Penderecki performance. So it has the weird voices and cacophonous rhythms, lots of chants. In fact, I think that's one of the names of the songs. There's all these chants mixed with sound effects. There's also some other modern composers, Anton Webern and George Crumb, my favorite, Night of the Electric Insects. So it's essentially a playlist augmented by Jack Nietzsche. Okay. Also, oh, I forgot completely, Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, which is used in just a very minimal way in a couple parts. Second choice, The Taste of DNA, which is thought to be a no-wave classic. So this is like 80s New York underground no wave. So this is a crazy album. It's only an EP, but it's pummeling, it's anxious, it's galloping. The bass player plays with a steel bar throughout. And then the singing is this insect-like wailing with guttural vocals. A skronk guitar, which is just sort of an insect-like rhythmic approach to hitting the guitar. And there are some lyrics that are clear that come across. Most of it's just a wailing, but in fact, I'm going to sing this part. Hit me, big head, dance with me, big face. I mean, that's pretty scary, especially my rendition. Anyway, so it sort of reflects the overall lifestyle of life in the Lower East Side in the 1980s New York, and the best example of the genre of no wave. Okay. Jacob John Niles, who was a traditional song collector, song catcher, they would call it. And although he's got a completely different style, it's not traditional at all. He does use traditional lyrics in untraditional ways. He's got this incredible register of like voice from going from the low register to soprano vocals and sort of in this sweeping way. And there's nothing quite like it that I've ever heard. For me, this is pure mystical mountain music, full of grief, mystery, pathos. It's intense, it's illogical, it's eerie. And that's it. John Jacob Niles, that's my last choice.
So I'm going to proceed in chronological order, that is personal chronology, like when I first, well, in the order in which I heard these things, not in which they were made. But my first choice would be The Saint of the Pit by Diamanda Galas. Note the rear cover, very extra creepy there. And what is so striking about this is just how minimalist the music is. It's basically just her voice reciting poetry, especially that of Charles Baudelaire, the French romantic, but very dark romantic, and his piece, The Self-Tormentor, which got my attention initially. Saint of the Pit by Diamanda Galas. She has a classical opera training, from what I understand, but uses it to very unconventional ends. And this record, which is basically her interpretation of a bunch of French 19th century poetry, but she does it with sort of whispers, screams, yells, um, and vocal stylings taken I don't know, probably the best analogy I could come up with would be Yoko Ono with some actual professional chops. Um, so the real highlight on the album for me is the Self-Tormentor by Charles Baudelaire. No rage, no rancor, I shall beat you as butchers fell an ox. As Moses smote the rock in Horeb, I shall make you weak. And by the waters of affliction, my desert will be slaked. I don't know, heavy stuff. Heavy stuff without any heavy guitars, without any drums, with minimal organ and just a lot of spookiness. So that's item number one. Then my second selection would be San Francisco's Factrix, fairly obscure band, but pioneers in the so-called industrial music sound. Before that meant a bunch of gated drums and cheesy keyboards. It was guys like this coming up with song titles like Eerie Lights, Heavy Breathing, Center of the Doll, my favorite, Thin Line, and Anemone Housing, which seems to evoke some kind of submerged corpse. And it sounds a bit like the sounds produced by it sounds like people who would, maybe have a skeleton or two in the closet, or a corpse maybe somewhere down the coast that they'd ferreted away somehow. It's got this kind of eerie spectral quality, and it's more like being in the back alleys of some serial killer's mind than directly scary. But it's the eeriness that wins for me. Also sounds a bit like the only other, just in terms of the effects used, the Zul group Archaea, if anyone knows that, that's a fairly obscure French group from the 70s, sort of in the magma train, but they were yeah, also a lot more sparse and spooky. So that's selection two. And then finally, again, in the order in which I encountered him, but this is the first by any kind of absolute chronology, Comus, First Utterance, which is basically a sort of folk record on speed about rape, murder, and mental illness. That all starts with a big nod to the titan of English letters, John Milton. Comus was originally a courtly masque written in the 17th century about imperiled virtue. A young lady trapped um, in the forest is assaulted there by a bunch of allegorical figures who represent the sins of the flesh, and needless to say, virtue prevails in that. In this 20th century version of the material, virtue does not triumph, and you get to hear some of the most sinister sounding bongos I've ever heard. That really captured the frenetic pace of the of the chase. So yeah, there's also a song on here about killing a Christian, I believe. So it's like this whole pagan revenge cycle of songs. Really creepy stuff. So those are my three selections. Whatever you deem best.
That's not
Look
gonna
at that
fly.
cat.
That is not gonna fly. That is not right.
Yeah, there's nothing frightening about that. Frightening records. I actually don't really have a lot of frightening records or, albums that I think are scary in some way. I have a lot of records that I thought were really scary when I was a kid, like Venom and Slayer, but it's pretty cartoonish. And it doesn't really scan as scary to adult me. Even though, the cover art's still cool. But so I'm kind of just going on vibes here, the vibes that a record evokes. And yeah, this is, by turns, the stuff I picked out is eerie or dark, suffocating. I don't know. Those are some of the words. Without further ado. So I picked out this Amoebics album. It's named Rise. Amoebics they essentially invented crust punk. And there's, just a million bands in their lineage and a million bands who tried to do what they did. None of them quite doing it as well. This record in particular, like there's a lot of Killing Joke in it, but it's as if Killing Joke couldn't really play their instruments very well. But there's also like some metal in it. And in a sort of, in particular, like there's this song Axeman, for instance. And I remember hearing that when I was a teen, I don't know, 13 or something maybe. And it was a kind of frightening song then. And it's still sort of a frightening song when I listen to it now, because that song is a vibe, I mean, you use that word shambolic earlier, Jackson, and it's got this staggering quality to it, and these guys were English. They came out of, I think, the southern England squat scene, maybe something like that, and then they later became like bikers. There's a lot of politics running through this music, and there's also a very strong thread of paganism running through it as well. So all this stuff kind of combines, and yeah, cool record. Still can send the proverbial chill down my spine when I hear it again. Second selection, it's not going to show up very well. Actually, maybe it sort of does. This is the soundtrack to Mandy. I actually forget who directed the movie, but it's Nick Cage. His girlfriend gets kidnapped and murdered by a cult somewhere in the Pacific Northwest woods, and he takes revenge. And it's a crazy ass movie, really well done if that's your thing. And the soundtrack as well, pretty cool art. The soundtrack it's by Johan Johansson. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's mostly I don't know, 3/4 of the songs are probably icy drones, I guess I'd call them. Which, there's a pretty high spooky factor to that. And then it sort of moves into, the parts where Nick Cage confronts the cult leader and they have a chainsaw battle. Then there becomes something, the music turns a little bit like epic, but also still creepy epic, I guess we can call it. So good record and a little bit scary anyway. And my final choice is Triptychon's first record. I don't think I've ever really known how to pronounce that. Eperistera Daimonis. I don't know. Presumably that's Latin. But so this is the group that Thomas Gabriel Warrior started after Celtic Frost. And, I've been a fan of his since, I don't know, for decades. And I remember I love his, I loved Hellhammer, and then I loved Celtic Frost. And those bands were definitely in the, wanted to be scary, but were actually, not scary, sort of funny. But their music was awesome. But he figured something out sonically. And he actually was starting to do this by the end of Celtic Frost too, Latter Day Frost. But this record is so dark and so heavy. Like, I guess I would use the word lightless. This is a lightless record, and it's suffocating in that respect. I've seen them live, actually touring this record, and it felt the same way. It was just crushing, you know. I mean, I'm sure there's heavier stuff out there, but something about the particular quality of these songs with this production, and also given that he seems to be an extremely serious man and extremely serious about his craft, it all combines to make kind of a scary record. So that's it.